Time for me. Just kidding. All right, should we get started? Let's get started, everybody. Oh my gosh, my tablet. There it is. So I went back a couple paragraphs. The volunteer service program had another core function: to propagandize the general public. Select committees referred to it as an aspect of the DOC's, quote, systematic public information program. A program that also included planned prison tours of government officials, media, and select members of the public, as well as the production and distribution of educational films. This public relations offensive intervened in an environment in which, quote, citizens had tended to look upon the correctional process as with suspicion, and too frequently have translated this suspicion into a lack of support for programs and facilities. By providing outsiders with the opportunity to enter the prisons and participate in the progressive and productive aspects of carceral power, planners hope to ally these suspicions, universalize their view of the world, and nurture the public's investment in human caging. The collaboration of the DOCS Public Relations Department volunteers were aggressively recruited, screening and put through an extensive orientation process designed, in their words, to, quote, develop community acceptance of the department's philosophy. A program coordinator told me that a typical volunteer orientation involved, quote, sitting in a room and having the fear of God drilled into you about the dangerous and conniving the criminals were. Notes from a meeting held in March of 1972 about the potential volunteer-run job programs in Attica clarifies the kind of suspicion DOCS needed to counteract. Following the presentation by Margaretti Api, the founding director of the volunteer service programs, meeting attendees, most of whom were prominent parishioners of black churches in the Rochester and Buffalo area, raised a series of pointed questions. How many black officials were involved in establishing the DOC's policy? How many could have ensured the mechanism of the screening volunteers would not exclude poor people and minorities? What was the department doing? What was the department doing to address the malady of white racism in the prisons? To whom should they forward complaints of brutality communicate to them by the prisoners? These questions and concerns reveal that although they were not necessarily aligned with the radical edge of the prison movement, these respectable members of the black middle class were also not aligned with the priorities of the state. Rather, they represented a target population that needed to be won over if carceral power was to enjoy a semblance of legitimacy. The meeting notes provide no insight into how APE or other DOCS officials answered these questions in the moment. Yet, a subsequent document nips the question about forwarding complaints of abuse in the bud. Volunteers were not to lead investigations or advocate for reform, the document states. Rather, they were, quote, to provide the services which will supplement and complement that which the department has set forth to do. The Metropolitan Applied Research Center, MARC, M-A-R-C, was one of the first organizations to form a volunteer partnership with the DOCS. MARC, M-A-R-C, was founded in 1967 by Dr. Kenneth Clark, a prominent black social psychologist who envisioned the organization as a black version of the Rand Corporation, an intimate counterinsurgency think tank. In a position paper, Clark states that Merck was focused on black people in northern cities who eschewed the disciplined demonstrations of the Southern civil rights movement in favor of a sporadic and self-destructive social eruption. The Black Awakening in capitalist America, Robert L. Allen shows that Merck played a key role in steering the Black Power movement towards integrationist demands and accommodationist modes of political engagement. With financial support from the Ford Foundation, Merck established a fellowship program for middle-class and politically moderate civil rights activists, developed an anti-riot program in Cleveland, Ohio, and helped launch the Joint Center of Political and Economic Studies, a Washington-based think tank that aimed to increase the involvement of Black Americans in electoral politics. Oh my God, I got a freaking thing already. Jesus Christ. And of course, it's not... Here we go. There you go. All right. Awesome. After Attica, Merck spearheaded the publication of the, quote, the awesome Attica tragedy. It tipped a public statement that affirmed some of the reform demands while ignoring the rebellion's challenge to the social order, signed by prominent members of several civil rights organizations, the National Association for the Advancement of People of Color, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the Coalition of Concerned Black Americans, the Congress of Racial Equality, the United Black People, they use the N-word, College Fund, among others. The statement pressured DOCS to take, quote, 7 steps towards prison reform, including recruiting minority prison guards, providing enhanced training to prison personnel, instituting the volunteer program, and enabling religious freedom. Although the reform demands of political freedom was conspicuously absent, programmification was an elegant solution to the growing problem. In a 1971 memo authored 5 days after George Jackson's assassination, J. Edgar Hoover expressed alarm that, quote, Black extremists, end quote, were gaining psychological control over prison population, quote, through the various Black studies program and other so-called educational activities conducted within the prison by outsiders. 2 years later, Raymond Proconnor, director of the California prison system, struck a similar chord while discussing the activities of radical organizations like the Prisoner Solidarity Committee and the National Lawyers Guild. We had all kinds of laws to keep people from breaking out of prison, but we had very little preparation for people breaking into the institution. Through volunteer services, DOCS managed to incorporate non-combative and reform-oriented organization like Merck, so that abolitionist formation like the NLG or the PSC could be excluded without public objection. Moreover, by framing the programs as a humanizing reform, it succeeded in presenting this operations to moral rather political terms. Through Merck, the other volunteer organization, DOCS, encouraged captives to focus their energies towards institutional politics, event planning, and reform-oriented activities, which enhanced the prison's legitimacy, relieved tension, and eschewed a radical political discourse that produced and was produced by rebellion. Dr. Clark, and especially Dixie Moon, Merck's chief administrator, maintained regular contacts with various imprisoned groups of individuals. They made several trips to Greenhaven and helped organize prison-based events that are open to the public, including picnics, prison reform, symposium, and art exhibits. By performing these activities, prison-based groups and formations were able to obtain a modicum of respectability, and some, such as the think tank, even secured modest financial sponsorship from the Commune's Foundation, Chase Manhattan Bank, and the South 40 corporations of nonprofit established by William H. Vanderbilt. On a much smaller scale, this process was roughly analogous to the philanthropic, that's how you say it.
Philanthropic.
Philanthropic, thank you. And corporate penetration of black politics that the Ford Foundation and the Merck helped facilitate beyond the walls. So-called inmates organization programs worked alongside the volunteer initiative as a key tactic of counterinsurgency and programification. The theory behind this cooptation strategy was elaborated during the 1976 Symposium on Law Enforcement Science and Technology, alongside papers about criminal justice information system, computer hardware configuration, and advanced surveillance techniques. A Silicon Valley-based researcher named J. Douglas Grant advocated for deploying incarcerated people as a, quote, correctional manpower resource. Under this auspices of the Institute of the Study of Crime and Delinquency, Grant wrote, quote, "It is becoming clearer that as long as we pour professional services into passive client recipients, little modification in behavior results. But when the clients become respected participants in the service functions, striking chance takes place." Responding to the epidemiological. I'm gonna write this. We're gonna look this up. We're right back. It's epidemic. I can't say it. Illogic. I'm gonna show it. It's a hard word to say for me, but that's okay. We'll get through it. Here it is. A scientific study of the distribution patterns and determinants of health-related states in specific populations to control health problems.
Is it like epidemiological? Epidemiological?
I think so. That's way closer than I got. Epidemiological model of prisoners' radicalization and rebellion. Grant posited that incarcerated people could be vectors of self-help ideology, a principle he termed, quote, contagion as a principle in behavior change. In the wake of Attica, prison-crats increasingly adopted this idea as a way of uprooting and criminalizing autonomous black study program and inculcate the populations against radical ideas. A sociologist, Juanita Descoto, has shown inmate organizations successfully encouraged incarcerated organizers to participate in an above ground, formally regulated system of institutionalized politics that made their activities easier to surveil and control. We can see that inmate organization and volunteer programs working in tandem in post-Attica celebration of Black Solidarity Day. As I shown in Chapter 2, the Auburn Rebellion erupted after Black radicals observed Black Solidarity Day in defiance of administrative prohibitions. In 1973, amid the reformist counterinsurgency, DOCS attempted to appease the population by recognizing Black Solidarity Day as an institutional holiday that allowed inmates organizations to organize events with participation from outside volunteers. Still operational today, the counterinsurgent effects of these programs are evident in a 1986-89 memo in which the members of the program staff reflects on the activities of an inmate organization called the Black Solidarity Committee, responding to the concerns that the Green Haven event celebrating the achievements of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so militant. The staff members cited the contributions of outside volunteers. Here it is. It is my considered opinion that several members of society on duty during the MLK family event confused the excellent delivery of some of the speakers with the theoretical content of their messages. Some of the speakers spoke with the passion and eloquence of a Black Baptist preacher, but the substance of all their speeches was conservative and status quo oriented. I.g., they recommended a strict puritanical lifestyle. In my professional opinion, this is the most effective type of message to disseminate in a penal setting. Furthermore, I'm extremely happy to report that not one inmate was removed from the gymnasium for poor disciplinary behavior. Once again, the MLK family event was peaceful and a tremendous asset to the wide array of programs that prevail in Green Haven Correctional Facility. Back to the text. This scene revealed a cyclical logic of programification, with well-meaning volunteers becoming instruments of pacification, promoting, quote, peace amid conditions of war. It conjures Saidiya Hartman's notion of innocent amusements as amid the violence of plantation's existence seemingly begun to pleasure-filled diversion becoming practices of domination and technologies of terror. The fact that, quote, conservatives and status quo orientated discourse were conveyed by people who were familiar with passionate Black vernacular traditions as all the better, since the authenticity increased the likelihood that captives would accept internalized these ideas. Although I am marshaling a critique of programification and how it attempts to quell Black rebellion, my intent is not to denounce the incarcerated target of this hidden war or to second guess the decisions they were forced to make. The reformist counterinsurgency was effective because it came immediately after the Attica massacre, which demonstrated the state's unmatched capacity to inflict world-shattering terror on rebels. In this moment, imprisoned organizers were faced with three terrible options. They could stop organizing and, quote, do their own time, and say, as the saying goes, they could continue to engage in illegal and systemic rebellion, exposing themselves to greater repression. Finally, they could attempt to maneuver within and against the new paradigm of politics, which presented new constraints as well as openings. Diaz-Coty cites the Green Haven think tank, New York's first formally recognized inmate organization, as a harboring of the prison movement's generalized decline. While I ultimately concur that this analysis is important to acknowledge that given what they were up against, Their achievements are remarkable. Originally published in 1976, instead of Prisons, a handbook of abolitionists, credit the think tank with establishing an array of higher education, re-entry, counseling, job training, work release, and youth development programs. While these ameliorative endeavors were ultimately appropriated by the DOCS and redeveloped to stabilize the system, they also helped to besiege population survive the ravages of war. Talk to anyone who was in prison in New York during the 1970s, 1980s, and to a lesser extent the 1990s. The chances are they've heard of the think tank and personally benefited from their organized work. Although I have never been incarcerated, this is true for me as well. This book would not exist were it not for Eddie Ellis, Larry White, Hassan Gale, and other think tank members who generously and patiently monitored me. During one of our conversations about this dynamic, Hassan Gale made it a plan, quote, "We knew we were tame as an organization, but we also didn't see many other options. After Rockefeller's killed his own prison guards, he understood that we wouldn't be able to get anything by taking hostages. His ambivalence about the organization he helped lead mirrors similar critiques by those situated within the nonprofit industrial complex, universities and other sites where intellectuals and political labor is channeled, captured, and co-opted. However, a critical distinction must be made as a think tank faced this contradiction within the totalizing regime of war. Increasingly, Hassan's description of the think tank was, quote, tame, alerts us to how imprisoned organizers found ways to critique, subvert, and exceed reformist counterinsurgency. His assertion is a direct reference to the 1973 speech delivered in Greenhaven by Queen Mother Audley Moore that opened this book. DOCS reluctantly allows this matriarchal of black radicalism into the Greenhaven after the think tank prevailed in the protracted struggle with the administration, outside volunteers, and other inmate organizations. As we see, Moore enjoyed the population to not lose sight of the fact that, as colonized and incarcerated subjects, they had been targeted by multiple layers of capacity of war. She then spoke at length about the colonizing forces seek to tame black rebellion through psychological warfare. In this way, Moore's speech situated DOCS strategy within much longer genealogy of anti-black violence and revolt. As the sponsor of her visit, the think tank helped sustain the spirit of revolt, even as they appeared to be going along with the program. However, when analyzed at the population level, it is clear the DOCS views programification as a proven effective means of pacifying the population, and that Attica continued to shape this view for a very long time. During a 1995 hearing about potential cuts to the state prison budget, David Stallone, a representative of more than 4,000 non-custodial prison staff, drew an explicit connection between well-funded prison programs and a manageable population. He stressed that rehabilitation was only one aspect of programification, dual function, and other being security. We cannot ignore the lessons of Attica without threatening public safety, he said. Idle time creates a vacuum that is filled with inmates themselves, creating an opportunity for inmates to organize themselves. More than 2 decades after this eruption, Attica remained a cautionary tale. compelling prison-crats to view incarcerated people as subjects of risk who are always teetering on the verge of rebellion. One of its key lessons was that if the state does not organize the program and program the population, they will do so for themselves, and if this happens, the state will lose control. It is to the incapacity of the counterinsurgency to fully capture, divert, and transform rebellious black radicalism that the final chapter turns the interlocking strategies of expansions, humanization, diversification, and programification targeted the captive's majority. Those deemed trackable, malleable, and immalleable to inducement. These strategies sought to encapsulate the rebels' demands within acceptable parameters, while convincing them that the reforms were begin. However, there was a small but important reminder. The so-called, quote, militant minority, the detritus of counterinsurgency that refused to be swayed by violence or inducement, by centering the experience of these prisoners of war and even more obscure aspects of the post-Attica prison pacification campaign is revealed. All right. Now we're on chapter 6. Anybody have anything that we want to talk about before I move on to chapter 6?
Yeah, I enjoyed how it pointed out how the atomization of the rebellion made it to where it wasn't serving anything but further pacification.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, which I think is a very important point, because I think that a lot of people are atomizing movements when it comes to talking about movements and not making them intersectional. I think that causes atomization.
Real quick, define atomization, if you can.
Breaking down something to its smallest component, or breaking down something into its smallest unit as possible.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anything else before I move on?
No.
All right. Anybody from the comments have any questions that I'd like to present in the comments? All right. Looks like there's no one. All right. Let's move on to chapter 6. The War of Black Revolutionary Minds. Failed experiments of scientific subjugation. Interesting. Dear Governor Rockefeller, this is all in quotes, please accept my congratulations upon your patience, compassion, courage, and fortitude in dealing with the tragic events of Attica. End quote. Thus begins the letter authored 4 days after the governor had authorized an incursion of Attica prison, during which the state assaulted force massacred at least 29 rebelling captives and sexually torturing hundreds of others. As its author, Dr. Robert J.R. Gallatin, showered Rockefeller with praise, even though it had recently been revealed that his armed agents, and not the rebels, as had been previously reported, had also killed 10 white prison guards who had been taken hostage. Like Rockefeller, Galati saw the collateral damage as an acceptable loss incurred in the process of quelling the existential threat to civilization. After praising God for the governor's resolute action, Galati got to the reason for his letter, the notion that quote, we now have two kinds of prisoners that we must deal with and we need separate programs for each type. Our penal operations have been structured around the prisoners who is basically a loyal American and is looking forward to his release from prison in order to return to our kind of society, Gallatin wrote. rooted in liberal notions and rehabilitation. This idea had served penal authorities in the past, but had become outmoded, as Galati saw it. State actors were now dealing with, quote, a new type of totally recalcitrant prisoners who one who, quote, just owns his country and preaches revolution, end quote. In this view, Attica illuminated, quote, the grave danger in mixing these two kinds of prisoners, end quote. Offering a solution, he suggests that, quote, those had considered themselves political prisoners should be taken at their word and placed among their peers in a special facility, end quote. Asserting the imperative of prison reforms, he added that this special facility would, quote, require an entirely new penal approach, discreetly tailored to meet the custodial requirements of these political prisoners, end quote. A week later, the governor responded, assuring Gallatin that his ideas would be, quote, studied carefully. In the previous chapter, I analyzed the public-facing yet woefully misunderstood side of the post-Attica counterinsurgency. The mundane ways state actors targeted the prisoners' captives majority with solicitous reforms that aimed to cleave popular support from the revolt's revolutionary edge. Gallatin's letter alludes to this strategy while pointing to the concealed underside of the coin, the incarceral techniques aimed at revolutionaries and political prisoners. Although this category, the U.S. political prisoner, does not officially exist according to the U.S. government, because if it did, that means, and is internally contested within the revolutionary left. Gallatin illuminates its importance unofficially for maintaining control. He and others believed this militant minority might hold the key for forestalling future rebellions. Tip of the Spear final chapter examines state-orchestrated assaults on black revolutionary minds, having already incarcerated insurgent black bodies, only to learn that physical capture did not equal control counterinsurgency. Experts tried and failed at exterminate insurgent black knowledge, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and even impulses. They employ techniques that go by a range of precise names: behavior modification, coercive persuasion, brainwashing, thought reform, mind control, human programming, and so on. The following pages analyze these clandestine experiments and their mutations across time in ways that reveal how the imperatives behind these initiatives far outlive their official pragmatic lives. I also show how the targets of these experiments, a tight group of revolutionary figures associated with the Black Liberation Army, BLA, critiqued and resisted this assault. Discussions of prison reforms routinely fail to account for the experiences of this class of prisoner, because to do so is to solely sanitize narratives of progress. The secret history offered here further illuminates the prisons as a domain of warfare, assailed by multiple layers of captivity and violence. Revolutionaries held captive at the tip of the spear refused to allow the state to reduce them to autonomons. Is that right? Automatons.
Yeah, automaton.
Vegetables, robots, zombies, and slaves. Unbroken and undeterred, they continue to pursue the radical aspirations their adversaries strove to eradicate. Research and narrating this chapter necessitates a disloyal and rebellious approach to the archives. I draw on a wealth of rarely examined state records stored in academic repositories and released through litigation of FOIA request, while also comprehending the profound limitations of these sources. Not only are the agents of this war structural incentivized to lie and omit critical details about their scandalous methods, but their notions of reality are filtered through elitist, patriarchal, and white supremacist epistemologies. For this reason, I interpret official sources through a black radical interpretive paradigm, submerging these sources within oral history and previously hidden documents produced the archive by black revolutionaries by investing incarcerated, criminalized, and pathologized knowledges with the greater degree of epistemic authority than I do the authorized knowledge of the state. I unlock a hidden terrain of struggle at the heart of this war. I began by examining the experience of the former political prisoners named Masiya A. Mugmuk, who was targeted by a prescription and control program, aka the RX program, after Attica. According to New York DOCS, the RX program provided intensive treatment to safety and security threats with, quote, a history of chronically maladjusted behavior. Although it enjoyed a brief official existence between 1972 and 1973, I revealed that the RX program's longer history included its hidden connections to the military-industrial complex and to the CIA, which had been conducting experiments on what agency director Alan Dulles termed brain warfare in prisons, hospitals, and beyond since this inception of the Cold War. According to the CIA's Inspector General, Project MK Ultra, quote unquote, the most well-known how do you say that one? Cryptantium? I don't know how to say it. We're gonna go find out. It's cryptonym. Never heard of that word. Have you ever heard of that word?
It means like it means something like old or secret.
Yeah, we're about to find out. Hopefully, if it did it. Nope, I have to add it. All right, a secret code name or alias used to conceal a person or entity's true identity.
Oh, you said cryptonym. I thought you said cryptid.
Yeah, I probably said it wrong. That's the word.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay.
Nym usually means something like denoting a name and or denoting like existence of a being, and cryptid means something secret or old or yeah, that makes sense.
No, I get it. Good job of breaking that down, by the way. All right, where was I at? Cryptonym for these experiments was concerned with, quote, the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior, allegedly developed to defend against communist brainwashing techniques capable of achieving thought reform. MK Ultra was concretely embedded within the counterinsurgent carceral regime. Long-standing practices of carceral domination helped shape these experiments, which in turn helped shape new technologies of carceral wars, technology currently deployed against captives as well as free populations throughout the world. Next, I show that although the RX program was discontinued in 1973, The FBI's prison activist surveillance program, PRISACT, emerged shortly afterward and extended this assault on black revolutionary minds. Despite the storied institutional rivalry between the CIA and the FBI, archive evidence suggests that the two agencies were to some extent collaborating on this counterinsurgency project. A 1951 CIA document entitled Organization of the Special Defense Interrogation Program, a precursor to MK Ultra, indicates that liaisons with the FBI on this subject may be described as cooperative, although somewhat mutually invasive. My findings indicate that this cooperation extended at least into the 1970s, the onset of the massive expansion of proliferation of prisons and penal culture in the United States. However, while the RX program and similar behaviors modification initiatives strove to direct, quote, program the minds of individuals, PRISACT was preoccupied with neutralizing revolutionaries whose authorities believed were able to program others. I close my examining in hidden contest that extends that I have been calling the Long Attica Revolt into the earlier 1980s. The struggle involves covert actions employed by the New York's PRISACT administrators to prevent black radical ideas from seizing hold of the captive majority, forestalling this prison-crat's claim that the BLA on conspiracy to organize, quote, another Attica. By narrating this struggle, I demonstrate that a hidden intelligentsia within the carceral apparatus aimed to decisively conquer the captive's population by eradicating the BLA, not as a coherent organization, but as an idea. Operating on this flawed theory that the passive majority, quote unquote, was being cohesively programmed by the militant minority, quote unquote. State actors believe that if they could effectively isolate some of the most intelligent and articulate BLA political prisoners, they could assert total control over populations on both sides of the wall. As I demonstrated, they were wrong. Their project failed spectacularly. It is with one reluctance that I describe this deployment of incarceral technology as, quote, failed experiments. The incarceral system expanded dramatically in the decades following the period under study. The expansion for which order, at least at the surface level, was a precondition. The technologies analyzed here facilitate that order, enabling the state to wage a campaign of counterinsurgency that was largely unknown to people outside the wall. These technologies inflicted intense forms of individualized and collective punishment, destroyed lives, and in their constant mutation, contributed to the development of newer and even more dystopian carceral technologies, including contemporary supermax prisons, an emerging form of e-carceration. Moreover, much of what I cover was direct and indirect links to ongoing methods employed in the global war on terror. There were techniques that were attested on black and overwhelming Muslim revolutionaries at home were redeployed abroad, and vice versa. Guantanamo Bay is the sum total of what they've been doing to Muslims in U.S. prisons for decades, explains BPB and BLA veteran Deborah bin Wada, a key figure in this chapter. I open this chapter with Dr. Gallatin's letter to Rockefeller for multiple reasons. First, because this content mobilizes the textbook counterinsurgency rationale. A revolutionary minority must be identified and removed from circulation as to prevent it from contaminating the broader population. Second, because the biography of its author is representative of the class of well-contacted, highly educated, yet generally obscured figures who are responsible for waging this one-directional war. Like many of the figures named in this chapter, Galanti cuts his teeth in foreign and domestic theaters of imperial conflict. He was a naval officer during the Korean War, where he served as commander of military and industrial security for the northeast area. He spent 27 years with the NYPD, eventually becoming a detective with Special Squad Number 1 and, quote, an elite unit that collaborated with the FBI to counter espionage, sabotage, and subversion. He held 4 degrees, including a Doctor of Judicial Science from Brooklyn Law School, as well as a certificate from the National Academy of the FBI and long-time membership to the National Sheriff Association and the International Association of Chief of Police, which played a key role in this global circulation of counterinsurgency knowledge. Fuck this dude. Very dangerous. He sounds very, very dangerous. Gallatin helped implement a new tool that enhanced the state capacity to surveil, capture, punish, kill, and study targeted populations. In 1965, Governor Rockefeller appointed him to serve as an integral director to the New York State Identification and Intelligence System, NYSIIS, the world's first computer system to employ in a criminal legal context. Then touted as the largest social science database ever assembled. NYSIIS allowed state actors to aggregate and disseminate intelligence across police, courts, prisons, probation, and parole agencies, using the same emerging technology that powered counterinsurgency operations in South Asia. NYSIIS became a prototype for criminal justice information system across the United States, including the FBI's National Crime Information Center. It laid that Galanti called, quote, a permanent foundation for more rational, scientific, and truly systemic control of crime and criminals. Although the NYSIIS is not a center aspect of this story, the existence of this emerging technology and its presence within the carceral system is critical to understanding the flawed theory undergirding these experiments in state repression. The theory assumes that human beings can be scientifically controlled, programmed like computers. This false idea came into being alongside advances in computer technology that made NYSIIS possible. Quote, even I gave an order to the machine. The situation is not essentially different from that which arises when I give an order to a person, end quote, wrote Robert Wiener in the Human Use of Human Beings in 1950 volume on a field he termed cybernetics. While this term has fallen into disuse, its imperatives persist, often in unacknowledged ways via cognitive science, a field that came into being as the event described in this chapter unfolded. The counterinsurgency actors who appeared embraced this mechanistic view of human beings as potential automatons, rooted in capitalist social relations and patriarchal white supremacy. Their ideas stand in direct conflict with those of the black revolutionaries they targeted. Those who praxis was rooted in a collectivized notion of social consciousness, political education, and people's counter-war. This top-down, undirectional assault on black revolutionary minds requires its expert administrators to ultimately familiar to be ultimately familiar with the ideas they aim to annihilate. They paid close attention to the development of black radicals' thought, both within and beyond prison walls, and they constantly updated their methods to respond to new formation of insurgency. For example, it is plausible that Dr. Galati drafted his outline for a prison-based counterinsurgency strategy after reading the BPP co-founder Huey P. Newton's essay, Prisons, Where Is Thy Victory? In a January 3rd, 1970 edition of the Black Panther. Although this cannot be proven, analyzing subversive literature was part of the Galatian's role in an intelligence operative, and the similarities between the two texts are striking. Quote, there are two types of prisoners, Newton wrote, while jailed for allegedly killing a police officer. Quote, the largest number of those who accept the legitimacy of the assumption upon which the society is based. The second type were the political prisoners, a minority that rejects those taken for granted assumptions and instead believes that society is corrupt and illegitimate and must be overthrown. Newton argued that the prison was, as it was then constituted, was incapable of achieving victory over either type. On the one hand, members of the captive majority, who Newton calls illegitimate capitalists, learn to participate in prison programs and, quote, say the things that the prison authorities want to hear. They appear rehabilitated, but continue to engage in criminalized activities upon release. On the other hand, the prison cannot gain a victory over the political prisoner because he has nothing to be rehabilitated from. Or two, ultimately, Newton argued that the prison of the 1970s were doomed to fail because they were capable only of incarcerating people's bodies, not the ideas that propel movements, ideas which circulate among all people, wherever they are. We're doing good on time. Good. Okay, let's see who's in here real quick. All right, I'll bring another one up, but I doubt they'll. Whether or not they read this text, Galanti and others responded to this dynamic by placing greater emphasis on the incarceration, manipulation, and elimination of ideas. Across the United States, Canada, and elsewhere, those tasked with keeping recalcitrant populations contained. We're going to look up what that word means. I'm going to look up that word. That's the second time I saw it. Good news, I've been saying it right too. That's awesome. Recalcitrant. So we're look this up. Recalcitrant, a person or thing stubbornly resistant to authority, discipline, or control. Often appear defiant, untruly, and unmanageable. Recalcitrant. Let's go back.
So it's just another way to say not a big fan of authority?
Yeah. The thing is when you are a political prisoner in a prisoner of war, right? You are saying that you are being held, basically like the society that you deem it, basically, not, how am I supposed to say this? It's not valid anymore, right?
Yeah.
So they're held differently than a regular prisoner that doesn't claim to be a political prisoner. There's just different stipulations with that, I think. I don't know. There's something to look into more. The calculants population contain quietly experimented with a variety of scandalous methods, including sensory deprivation, electroshock therapy, isolation, hypnotism, chemical Kim, chemotherapy, chemotherapy. There we go. Surgery, electrode plantation, implementation, and so on. Jesus. Increasingly, Newton's 1974 essay, "The Mind is Flesh," considers advances in the science of behavioral control and provides a critical revision of his earlier concept, citing a number of dystopian counterinsurgency projects developed since 1970. He writes, quote, "In order to prevent ourselves from being enslaved by the minority, the majority of us must vigorously insist that new controls of mind not be applied by a few without the prior conscious consent of the many, both as a technique and objective." Prescribed pacification. Anybody want to add anything before I move on to the next section?
No, not really.
All
I'll
right.
save it for the end.
Sounds good. Prescribing pacification. Quote, "They wanted to eliminate freedom fighters, to control us physically and mentally, and to transform us into nonviolent, passive, meek, humbled, obedient, modern-day slaves. This is how Miasa A. Mugmug explains the goals of the RX program through which he and others are coerced into becoming test subjects for a wide array of behavior modification technologies during the late 1960s and early 1970s. We were sipping coffee in the living room of his small apartment. Let me read this. We were sipping coffee in the living room of his small apartment, where books, archival documents, African art, primitive weaponry, covered every available surface. Although his remarkable story deserves a full accounting, that task exceeds the scope of this chapter. Hold on a second, let's see what someone's saying here. Yeah. What follows is but a portrait of his bold and excruciating life of rebellion under some of the most intense forms of captivity unimaginable. This portrait reveals how far counterinsurgency experts were willing to go to eliminate black revolutionary thought and behavior, and most importantly, the failure of their experiments and the inviolability of Messiah spirits. After all, despite enduring a panoply of terror, a panoply of terror. Ooh, that's a different word. Is that panoply? Panoply. Find out. Panoply. Different new word. What you think of? A magnificent, extensive, or impressive array, display of items, or a complete set of ceremonial attire and equipment. All right. Got it. Never ceased to resist and was never divested of his cognitive autonomy, and somehow managed to smile often. At the age of 80, he remains a warrior, a teacher, a walking archive of forbidden knowledge that he dispenses freely, but with great care. In the 1960s, at the age of 17, Masia, then known as Sylvester, oh my gosh, Cholo Mandali confessed to raping a white woman. As he tells it, he was leaving a party with a friend when he was accosted by the new NYPD, taken to the Rockaway Beach police station, tied to a chair, and viciously beaten. He eventually signed a confession that he could not read because he had not learned about how. Quote, I did a lot of foul stuff when I was younger. He told me I was a street hustler, a gambler, a dope dealer. I used to burglarize rich people's houses, and I was a bodyguard for a big-time gangster, but I've never raped anyone. He and his family considered fighting the charges, but were dissuaded by the white attorney, who told them he had no chance of winning, and reminded them that just 5 years earlier, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy, who was allegedly whistling at a white woman, had been brutally lynched in Mississippi. He followed the advice of his counsel, was found guilty, and was sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. A, quote, legal lynching, as he called it. In the summer of 1961, while behind the walls of Auburn Prison, Masia joined the Nation of Islam, integrated a process of transformation, a true inspiration from Malcolm X. Like Malcolm X, Masia taught himself to read and study the dictionary and became politicized through the intensive collective programs of religious, political, and economic and cultural studies. He told me a mind-blowing story about how his connection to Malcolm X goes beyond inspiration, that it was a material connection forged through a grassroots conspiracy to subvert penal authority. According to Masia, I can't say it, on more than one occasions, Malcolm X traveled to Auburn disguised as a Christian minister in order to gain access to Ned X Hines, aka Hakima, a key figure in Auburn's active NOI contingent. Instead of converting Hakimi to Christianity, as the authorities believe he was doing, Malcolm would systematically, in his distinctively eloquent way, transmit black radical ideas to the captive population. Hakimi dutifully listened to Malcolm and committed his words to memory. He then turned to a cell and transcribed this verbal enlightenment into writing, blending it with knowledge he obtained from the contraband texts of early black studies scholars J.A. Rogers. Masia and others would then generate handwritten reproductions of Hakima's transcription and circulate them throughout Auburn and beyond. This process constituted an illicit material network of black revolutionary epistemology that reveals the deep roots of the long Attica revolt, misrecognized the social infrastructure as a form of fantastical programming. In 1973, studies noted that black extremists in New York prison was not the result of the schizophrenic thought disorder as previously delivered, but of, quote, a local culture system in which these black people have been systematically indoctrinated. Such systems of cognitive autonomy would have to be destroyed if the state was ever to truly be in control. In the wake of Malcolm X's state-facilitated assassination by NOI triggerment, Masia broke with the nation, developing eclectic political philosophy that drew from global streams of black radicalism. After studying the Mau Mau from within, the other texts, he fashioned himself a Mau Mau behind prison walls, organizing formations of underground resistance that solidified their authority through secret oath-taking practices. Masia embraced a embrace of Kenya's specific brand of anti-colonial nationalism is significant given that the British Empire employed a system of prison-based counterinsurgency against the Mau Mau in the 1950s. Moreover, 2 years after Malcolm's assassination, when J. Edgar Hoover laid out the goals of the Bureau's COINTELPRO against black nationalist hate groups, they drew lessons from the British experience in Kenya. This connection was revealed in the program's primary goal to, quote, prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. Because such a coalition might be the first step towards a real Mau Mau in America, the beginning of the true black revolution. Masia, I'm going to guess, represented this possibility. Through physically mobilized behind concrete and steel, he and others were engaged in a global struggle against imperialism. That it primarily unfolded in cognitive terrain did not make it any less real or significant. Masia combination of black radical iteration, militant and traceability, and charismatic authority represented precisely that which penal authorities aim to study and eradicate. The psychological evaluation from the early 1970s characterizes him as a antagonistically inclined individual who was rigidly resistant to authoritarian order, and rabid, racist black power advocates who display, quote, open defiance and disdain towards constituted authorities. During the same period, the Assistant Attorney General noted that Masia was, quote, one of the worst, if not the worst disciplinary record ever compiled by the New York State prisoner. When I read this characterization out loud, Masia released a deep, bellowing laugh. These were examples of how the state criminalized resistance to oppression, he explained. Between 1961 and his parole in 1975, Masia endured a fathomable degree of punishment, terror, and degradation. I've been chained, whipped, gassed, and put through a whole lot of hell while I was incarcerated. He spent a total of 10 years confined in various forms of punitive isolation, much of it in Unit 14, a, quote, special housing unit, end quote, that could only be reached by entering Clinton Prison and then taking an elevator that led to rows of underground cages, which authorities would access from the front or the rear. Attorneys from the National Lawyer Guild described how this subterranean zone encouraged sadistic guards to cessate their libidinal urges through their captives. Libidinal, I guess that's the sexual urges, I guess.
Libidinal.
Yeah. Quote, the treatment of men in Unit 14 was not explainable simply by political motivation of prison officials. They wrote, the guards truly hate the men, and they're charged and clearly get some kind of sick thrill out of torturing them. Among the various forms of torture Masia endured as a carceral technology called the dark hole, quote unquote, a tiny concrete enclosure that when sealed is totally devoid of light, in which there is no plumbing and barely enough space to accommodate an average adult. Demonstrating in crouching positions he was forced to assume for unknowledgeable lengths of time, often while strapped naked, starved, and forced to experience his own filth. Masia placed both feet on his reclining leather chair and hugged his knees. This is how I became extreme, he explained, while holding the pose. It was conditioned by cruel and unusual punishment. The torture inflicted on Masia and others was part of an evolving regime in which social and behavioral scientists within and beyond the United States were increasingly looking to science for methods of subjugation. Previous research has traced the behaviorist turn in prison management to the April 1961 conference entitled The Power to Change Behavior, where James V. Bennett, head of the Federal Bureau of Prison, invited MIT psychologist Edgar Schein to present his CIA-sponsored research on techniques of thoughts reform, brainwashing, and cohesive, exposing these projects or originalists' orientation. Schein discussed various Asian methods. There were Oriental. I can't say that. Asianness. They used the bad word. That were said to have cracked the minds of American POWs. My basic argument is this, he told a group of associate wardens. In order to produce marked change of behavior and or attitude, it is necessary to weaken, undermine, or remove the support to the old pattern of behavior and the old attitudes, a goal that was achievable either by removing the individuals physically and preventing any communications with those whom he cares about, or by proving to him that those whom he respects are not worthy of it, and indeed should be actively mistrusted. New York's Dannemora State Hospital for the criminally, they use insane, I'm sorry, Dooley, they used it, DHS, became a key site for these experiments. In 1966, Governor Rockefeller launched an effort to bolster the institution's status as a research hub by hiring teams of psychological and psychiatric consultants from the State University of New York system, the University of Vermont, and McGill's University of Montreal. The latter institution is particularly notable because its psychology and psychiatry programs have received major funds from the Rockefeller Foundation, and because under the leadership of Donald H. Hebb and Inwin Cameron, respectively, both have been revealed as an important site for barbaric MKUltra research. With the acid of this consultant, the DHS, which was later rebranded the Adirondack, I can't say Adirondack, I can't say that dang word. Adirondack Correctional Treatment Education Center, ACTEC, hosted an assortment of behavioral science experiments in incarcerated people. In 1967, Donald G. Forgay, who graduated from McGill in 1950 and went into chair the psychology department at the University of Vermont, he brought on as a co-principal investigator for the multi-year grant entitled, quote, the Intensive Treatment Unit, funded by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, MKUltra conduit that Nelson Rockefeller helmed between 1953 and 1954. Topics of investigation including Muslims of black nationalist groups and the psychophysical studies.
Yeah, psychophysical.
Yeah, of study of time estimation in hospitalized felons with different degrees of isolation. Themes that seem highly relevant to Miasa's subjection to the dark hole. In 1968, McGill psychologist Ernest P. Poser conducted experiments on whether psychopaths and those deemed hopeless suffer from an adrenaline deficiency that slows down their ability to learn, inhibiting impulses from fear-producing experiences. The wording of this inquiry is notable for the Pavilion specificity, which goes beyond question of thought and behavior into preconscious impulses elicited from different physiological states. To answer the question, Poser and a graduate student named Deborah G. Sitman injected captives with adrenaline and exposed them to electroshock treatment. In 1969, DSP staff had trained prison guards in hypnosis and aversion therapy techniques, resulting in scenes that an observer called quite revolting for those who watched and those who took part. The director of a think tank called the Narcotic and Drug Research Institute describes ACTEC's therapeutic community program in ways that are eerily similar to CIA-sponsored efforts to obliterate human consciousness in order to rebuild it anew. It, quote, takes you back to the kind of kindergarten level and then brings you back up, he told Congress. The DHS ACTEC was the ideal location for this controversial research. It was located in, in Dannemora, a small prison town just 25 miles from New York's northmost border with Canada, that earned the name Little Siberia because its brutal winters and profound isolation. Moreover, because of an entrenched culture of white supremacy and economic dependency on prisons, Dannemora residents were unlikely to protest illegal or immoral activities perpetrated by prison authorities. Conveniently, DHS and ACTEC was adjacent to Clinton/Unit 14, an arrangement that facilitated a quiet flow of human girths over the wall to be used for new experiments. For incarcerated people, these transfers were a site of constant physical and verbal resistance. Dr. Forgaze wrote that he frequently, quote, observed black militants brought to the DHS to leg irons and straitjackets, kicking, fighting, cursing, spitting in the faces of the guards, and otherwise breaking every rule, adding that these were the types of incited rebellions in San Quentin and Attica, while prison crets used the possibility of punitive transfer to Unit 14 as a system-wide threat to produce obedience across the captive population. An even more terrifying threat was that one might be sent to the hospital where rumors had it captives were being lobotomized. Plans for what became the RX program were set in motion during the summer of 1971, during a brief interim between the Auburn and Attica rebellions. According to the notes from DOC's Mental Health Service Task Force, which included prisoners, administrators, representatives from the Department of Mental Hygiene and the state Supreme Court judge, an academic consultant, included Forgaze, Commissioner Oswald directed that consideration be given to behavior modification, and rather serious thought should be given to segregating the untreatables, militants, for example, so that we can then go about with the constructive program with a major part of the population. In other words, Oswald's progress 206. I'm going to look ahead real quick. Official launch. Remember that. 206. Everybody remember 206. 206. 206. 206. I'm looking ahead. Oh my God. Long. 206. Holy crap. I'm going to have to find another stopping point. Looks like, oh my God, 206. Yeah, I'm gonna find another talking point. There you go. 206. Okay. Officially launching in December of 1972, the RX program and the ACTEC constituted a post-Attica rebranding of long-standing practices of experimentations, according to the program manual, which Miesa and I located amid the massive pile of documents in his room. The initiative aimed to make imprisoned militants easier to control while producing generalizable knowledge with applications beyond prison. In the DOCS words, it proposed its purpose was, quote, controlling and treating inmates who have become clearly unresponsive to the routine correctional experience, while also providing a, quote, base for both departmental and outside scholarly research as to the nature of aberrant behavior patterns. Aberrant behavior patterns. The etymology
Abhorrent.
Abhorrent behavior patterns. The etymology of the behavior, delineation of appropriate techniques of treatment and prevention. Little about what was taking place in Attica and the ACTEC was how it appeared on the surface. According to the official accounts, on February 1973, the institution held 455 captives. However, as a diversified institution, ACTEC operated myriad programs dispersed across several buildings, each of which contained multiple wards, floors, and wings, ensuring the captives in the same institutions could have widely different experiences. The institutional archives is crammed with letters from captives pleading for transfer into ACTEC, officially its diagnostics and treatment center, which promises to improve one's chance of earning parole. But the program was distinct from the RX, where candidates had to be nominated by a program committee based in Albany. Miesas refused his RX nomination in the spring of 1973. In a letter addressed to him, and Clinton Commissioner Oswald wrote, "I am truly sorry to learn that you view this program as a conspiracy against you and an effort to impede your impending litigation." Miesa had evolved into a formidable jailhouse lawyer who had a major lawsuit pending against the DOCS and who had already succeeded in reducing his maximum sentence to 15 years, meaning the DOCS would soon be forced to release him, attempting to dispel some of the more bizarre rumors. Oswald emphasized that the program, quote, does not include cruel and unusual punishment, does not involve the use of drugs, and will never involve psychosurgical operations to alter behavior. In his reply, Miesa reinstated his position. Once again, I will not volunteer for so-called RX, which in reality, its primary objective is to engender marked change of political prisoners' pattern of behavior and attitudes, to systematically undermine the fundamental fibers of the third developing world outlook into which where behavior and attitude patterns are reflected. He and others would not allow themselves to be transformed into docile creatures, robot slaves, and neo-slaves, he continued. What happened next would have been taken from the pages of dystopian science fiction. On March 22nd, 1973, approximately 15 SART guards, all of whom were clad to full riot gear and armed with gas guns, shields, and batons, ascended on both entrances of Miesa's unit, 14 Cage. At this point, his narrative, he reminds me that he did thousands of push-ups per day. is skilled in various styles of martial arts and had defended himself against armed goon squads before. He told me he knew that they would be coming for him and that his plan was to subdue his assailants, liberate everyone on the tier, and escape from Clinton, flee across the Canadian border, and link up with the black underground. The militant audacity of his radical imagination will speak to why the state went to such lengths to control him. The DOCS communique claimed that Miasa resisted forcing the CERT to employ necessary force to complete his transfer. However, a signed advent by Miasa's lawyer published accounts in the Black Panther, Midnight Special, and Prisoner Digest International. The Miasa himself claimed otherwise. According to these sources, Miasa was given no opportunity to resist. Rather, CERT agents preemptively fired 4 canisters of tear gas into his cell, one of which would have smashed into his face and caused serious injury had he not dodged it. Unit 14 was soon consumed with gas, causing the entire tier and even the masked assailants to experience intense pain. Miasa's maintained that normally the use of gas would have slowed him down. That, quote, "We had been gassed so many times before that we were immune. And a claim I have heard from others who endured similar forms of repression. He is certain, however, that in this instance, CERT agents used a special compound of military CS gas. Quote, I would rather them shoot me with a shotgun, he told me, and it blinded me, and I couldn't hardly breathe. I was suffocating like I was drowning in water. I became hopeless and helpless. I became like a baby. I couldn't defend myself. His assertion that this chemical weapon made him, quote, helpless, like a baby, provides a potential clue into the authoritarian means by which carceral technologists reduce people to a kindergarten level before attempting to reprogram and reconstitute them anew. It was not until Miasa collapsed that the guards entered his cell. As he struggled to yell Black Power over and over again, they beat him with their batons, chained his arms and legs to a long metal pole, and rushed him towards the elevator on their shoulders as though he were a hog being taken to the slaughter. I'm going to stop there, and we'll go on to Miasa recollects exactly what happened next. So we're going to stop there. Give me some time. What page? 208 for me in my book. Let me write it down though. I'm going to try to find my pen. Where are you, my pen? There you are. Pages 208. And it's MASIAS recollection. All right. Remind me that's right there. It's the second paragraph down. I'll probably still go backwards, but it's always good. Okay. All right. Dudley, what would you like to mention?
I don't get why people want to use terms like narcissist or psychopath or sociopath as insults when this is its history. Like, this is what the usage of those things as insults supports.
I think these were psychiatrists that were actually trying to create those things and look out for those things. Like, they did misuse the term and used it towards anybody, even though these people were like completely valid in their position. You know what I mean? As Black revolutionaries, you know?
I know that. I'm just saying, like when it was being pathologized into like just meaning anyone who's bad. That's what I mean. Like how it's being used, how it's used to how it's used to legitimize institutionalization.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're trying to institutionalize and lobotomize all these revolutionaries because the fact is that the state sees them as dangerous because of the fact that they're able to organize and they just have the knack for it. Plus, the conditions actually bring them to that position in a sense, right? So, like, yeah. So, like, they don't want people to organize in prison because that is another link in the chain of the state, and it's a front line thing. You know what I mean? So, like, that's why it's constant war in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, it just baffles me how people don't realize that when they use those terms, like, either they don't realize or they don't care that they are support. Yeah, a little bit of both for just about everyone. But yeah, that they're supporting the logic that is used to institutionalize people for not falling in line.
Exactly. And it usually falls on the shoulders and on non-white people, mostly like indigenous and black people. So it falls on them. They're the ones that get the most damage dealt to. And then in the wake of that, like you can get white disabled people that do get caught up in the wake of those things, but it's mostly targeted towards black people.
Especially black disabled people.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're taking non-disabled black people and making them disabled. That's what they're doing. They're destabilizing them by making them disabled through torture.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, and like this is another thing. This is a type of revolution that we should be engaged and have an analysis on. I wonder if they still deal with the same things. I'm assuming they do because I would say any black person or indigenous person that's in there is a product of war, is a prisoner of war in a sense. You know what I mean? Because like you saw that dude, they purposely gave them more time and didn't even fight it because they're like, well, you're not gonna, you know what I mean? Because of the racist system that gets them incarcerated. You know what I mean?
And it's just like the whole like using medicalization to cause harm only holds so much validity because people think that people's value should be based on their abilities and how normal they are, when people's value should be based on that they exist. But since we don't live in a system that does that, we are constantly having to deal with logic that ends up getting into our heads that tells us that we should feel superior, that we should feel like we're better than anyone else. Like, no.
Yep. I get that. You know? So, but yeah, this is the other thing too is that you notice that also when they talked about the bond thing, that they purposely make bonds so high that people can't afford them, so they keep them incarcerated too. And then during that time, right, they do something wrong, boom, then they get another charge. You know what I mean? And they stay longer. It's purposely done. You know? Yeah. Purposely done. Because if we release most of the black revolutionaries and most of the revolutionaries that are in prison right now, that means that they would go out into the world and do like a Black Panther thing, and that's what the state doesn't want. So they keep them controlled and seduced and managed within those things as much as possible by using these programs to keep them controlled and subjugated. You know, because they would be a threat. I mean, like they'd come out and we'd be organized and shit. Because let's be fair, the left is disorganized. We're disorganized. We need to buckle down. We are in the stage of arming the proletariat and being militant towards the state.
Yeah.
Armed struggle is the stage.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, that I found it very important that we recognize that, like, atomization is constantly happening with like people's rebellion and people's like their ideas of liberation and revolution. It's atomized. They aren't being intersectional about it, and it's causing both them and everyone else harm because they don't want to get out of their comfort zone and go, yeah, maybe I should be less ableist and be more supportive of self-determination of disabled people. Or, yeah, maybe I should, like, get rid of these patriarchal norms inside my head, or at least fucking deconstruct them. Or, yeah, maybe I should just not allow insert oppression, especially when that oppression being inserted is racism or sexism or anti-queerness or like ableism or just like it's a weird concept to me that people don't think within like intersection. Like they always think atomized.
Yeah.
And that's a real hindrance on all of the movements that are seeking liberation.
In order to rectify this, the state no longer needs to exist, and we need to build a society that like engages with all those things and actually gives like equitable not equality, but I can't say the damn word. Equity to everybody. You know what I mean? Like I said, I think my take is if we build infrastructure according to disabled people and in the vision of disabled people, in their perspective, how much more does that give accessibility to non-disabled people? It's more accessibility for non-disabled people too. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
building infrastructure, building a structure that is like based on those things would actually help those people that are not disabled. It'd make it much easier for them too. You know, it's kind of like the whole concept. Like, there's no liberation without Black liberation. Black liberation and Indigenous liberation is the liberation for all. You know what I mean? That's the answer.
Yeah. The liberation for any is the liberation for all, because if all is not included, it's not liberation.
Yeah.
If there's any liberation not included in liberation, it's just comfort seeking.
So, so like I would have to say that we need to bring our analysis more into the prison sphere. What's our analysis there? What's going on? What are the dynamics there? What are the stratifications that are inside the prison system? What are what kind of liberation or rebellions do they engage with? You know what I mean? Like that's another analysis that we should take because they're front lines on the state. They continuously get they get experimentations from the state to see if something will work. You know what I mean? So
yeah, they are a class of people that are at the forefront of any harm that is done because they will end up being the blueprint.
Exactly. They'll be the blueprint. And if it's successful, then they'll employ it elsewhere because they were successful within those things. Plus, it gives them the bounds to do that because that's why when people look at like people that are criminals, that do crime as like the worst of the worst in society, and they deserve all that torture because they did that, which is very dehumanizing and non-rehabilitation. It's just punitive. And like, let's just toss the key away instead of actually like, maybe the person did do these things and maybe we should figure out, you know what I mean? Like, it's not
and how like essentialist logics make it to where people are seen within an essential view, not an existential view. They aren't seen as the ability to change. They aren't seen as anything other than an object, like you said, but especially within the confines of like people's people's psyche, like
Yeah.
especially within like psychiatry or anything like that. When people end up justifying those things, they say, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal," until there's T4-esque programs going, "You should unalive your neighbor, or you should report them so we can unalive them for you." Because let's be honest, during the T4 programs, before the T4 programs, parents were calling doctors and the government to unalive their children, their disabled children. And that is the type of stuff that made it to where the T4 programs could exist in the first place.
Yeah.
That's why I think that the banality of evil and intersectionality are a very important duo, because you have to analyze that it's harm that matters, not offense, harm. And when you don't analyze that the root of something supports that harm, even when it's not your group that is oppressed, that is being harmed, and it's just harming another oppressed group that you're not a part of, that's going to spread. It's going to grow. The tree of fascism grew inside of the soil of the people who didn't care about disabled people or anyone who was oppressed.
I got another fucking violation. No, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. But yeah, I think this is good. We'll be back tomorrow, and stuff like that. So let's hopefully you'll be here tomorrow, and so will Joe. Joe is on vacation, so they're out doing stuff. So they have a hard time being able to
nice.
Yeah. So, but anyways, I'll go ahead and close it down. I appreciate you. Thank you for being interactive with us and driving the conversation and stuff like that. So
Yeah, sure thing.
cruelty is the point. Yep. Cruelty is the point. All right, everybody. Wish you luck. Be well.